It is good to be here, and the discussion is a discussion that is so absolutely important that all the team that has pulled together to organize this conference is excited about the potential, because somehow, by the grace of the good God, of a good God, we need to be filled with passion for the cities of our world. I didn't hear much, response to that. The story of Jonah is very instructive to us about human reactions and about human success based upon the power of God. But it ends this way. But the Lord said, "You have been concerned about this plant, though you did not tend it or make it grow. It sprang up overnight and it died overnight. And should I not have concern for the great city of Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left, and also many animals?" The question that we are really assigning ourselves, really trying to understand, is what is the value of a human life, regardless of where that human life is located. An Egyptian physician by the name of Mustafa Mahmoud penned the following words. He said, "At first glance, life appears meaningless, futile, full of contradictions and absurdities. But a deeper meditating look uncovers beauty, order, and harmony, revealing life as a supreme accomplishment of eternal wisdom. From the atom to the galaxy, a master designer is at work and at play, created by a master builder, unequaled in his attributes and grace. All creation is an act of love and providence, a drama imbued with meaning." In the life of Jonah, there was a divine hand guiding and moving him, directing him with one providence after the next. By the time we read this last passage in Jonah, the confusion of the last week had been almost more than Jonah's senses could bear. The anguish of struggling against God's will, the desperate attempt to escape from the presence of the Almighty, being aboard a ship in the midst of a horrendous storm, and finally thrown into the Mediterranean and swallowed by a humongous fish. And by the way, sometimes the belly of a fish, is the best place in the world for us to be, because it's the only place where God can talk to us. Finally, when Jonah was ready and the whale couldn't stand it any longer, it was exit shore left for the runaway prophet. Can you begin to imagine way back in your consciousness that at that point, Nineveh was beginning to look pretty good to Jonah? Nineveh, a city of vast population, wealth, and power. A city which viewed the rest of the world from the vantage point of world dominion and authority. A city noted for its violence and moral corruption. It was the Assyrians, by the way, who first adopted impaling criminals as punishment, and later the Romans refined it to crucifixion. But Jonah, as he contemplated his invitation by God to go to Nineveh, had a problem. He didn't want to go. He just simply did not want to go. But the bottom line is this. When you read the story of Jonah, what emerges loud and clear is that God loved the Ninevites. that he was interested in their well-being. And, by the way, in spite of the fact that they were not Jews. For God is no respecter of persons. Every individual, regardless of who he is, what he does, where he's been, or where he lives, is valued by God, holds tremendous value to God. And you know, God continues to love the inhabitants of the world's cities. The same divine heart of love that was sensitized by the pain experienced by the 120,000 inhabitants of Nineveh, who didn't know their right hand from their left, is still sensitized to the pain experienced in the cities of our world today. Listen to this commentary. In the great cities where the multitudes in the great cities there are multitudes living in poverty and wretchedness, well nigh destitute of food, shelter, and clothing. While in the same cities are those who have more than the heart could wish, who live luxuriously, spending their money on richly furnished houses, on personal adornment, or worse still, upon the gratification of sensual appetites, upon liquor, tobacco, and other things that destroy the powers of the brain, unbalance the mind, and debase the soul. The cries of starving humanity are coming up before God. What about the cities in our world, the cities around us? What about the suffering of humanity? What about the call to the city? We all love, in some senses, the suburbs or the fields or a place where we can get away. But what about the cities of our world? I was called many years ago now to the city of Toronto to work in the mother church there. Yee-hoo! And, you know, I remember going right to the center of the city and watching the people coming by the hundreds and the thousands as they entered the Eaton Center in downtown Toronto. And I asked myself the question, what do we have to offer these people? I love what I hear from David Franklin, because his church is sensitive to the needs of those around. But you know, when you're coming at first to a new city where there has not been a lot of, a huge amount of exploration and taking care of needs, one wonders, what will this church do? So one night I did what my family thought I was trying to understand. So I went to a place called the Prayer Palace. Now, for those from Toronto or those who were woo-hooing, you ought to woo-hoo again. I went to the Prayer Palace and I just watched. I saw some things that were absolutely absurd to me. I was on my knees praying with the congregation where a man who was running on the back of the pews ran all the way down to the front and prostrated himself. I saw people laugh that night. I saw them cry that night. And you know what observation I drew? As a matter of fact, at one point, my son looked at me and said, "Dad, we really don't belong here." And I looked at him and I thought about this whole situation. And here was my conclusion after my study and attempt to understand. Doesn't sound very profound, but it is very true. Life in the city is hard. Life in the city is a challenge. For people living in the city, life is difficult in many circumstances. Listen to some of the following statistics. And I want to give you these because I want to build in your mind a rationale as to why should I sense a call to the city? Why should I be interested in this topic? UNICEF reports that approximately 25,000 children under the age of 5 die each day in the world. That is over 9 million children under 5 every year. That means that in the time that we sit here this evening, probably 2,000 more children have died. The vast majority of these little ones live in the city. In the cities of Thailand, excuse me, in the cities of Thailand, there are over 800,000 child prostitutes, forced into the oldest profession by greedy opportunists. In India, there are 400,000. In Brazil, 250,000. In the United States, young women under 18 who use prostitution as at least a temporary basis on which to survive number approximately 2.4 million, according to Time magazine, and a report that they did not too long ago. Astounding statistics. The U.S. Census, here's some more. According to the U.S. Census Bulletin that was released on March 4, 2015, U.S. cities are home to 62.7% of the U.S. population, but comprise approximately 3.5% of the land mass. Go figure. The United Nations report on population states that 68% of the world's population will live in urban areas by the year 2050, up from 55% at present. The UN report predicted that approximately 2.5 billion people will be living in ever-expanding cities in the next 30 years, and as much as 90% of the urban growth will be centered in Asia and Africa. The boom in city dwellers will be concentrated in certain countries, with 35% of urban expansion occurring in India, China, and Nigeria alone between 2018 and 2050. The number of people, and listen to this, the number of people living in urban areas worldwide has risen rapidly from 751 million in 1950 to 4.2 billion in 2018. We see the cities in our division, in our territory, including nearby Detroit and Chicago. I read something that really blew me away. You who live in Michigan probably know this. In the 1980s, there were 1.8 million people living in Detroit. As of 2 years ago, there were 680,000 people. There has been a huge shifting. In the city of Chicago, great violence. It is not uncommon for us to hear what we heard today about Cincinnati, with 4 people being murdered in a bank. As Seventh-day Adventist Christians, we talk about the fact that people need to get out of the cities. Yet if they all got out of the cities, they would just have more cities, because there's so many in the cities. What about the people who live in the cities, who have always lived in the cities? Does God not have a plan for them? Should we not have plans and purposes and dream big for the cities of our world? For those who prefer a more rural lifestyle, the thought of moving into a crowded city is objectionable, to say the least. However, God is sensitive to the cities. Nineveh. Go to Nineveh. So Jonah went to Nineveh. Here he carries out one of the greatest outreach programs the world has ever witnessed. He walked and he talked and he preached and he prayed. One far more powerful than the mightiest Assyrian general was with him. He was a success. The Bible says the people of Nineveh believed God's message, so they believed that everyone should fast, and all people, from the greatest to the least, put on sackcloth to show that they had repented. Had it been up to Jonah, it wouldn't have wound up that way. But here is the reality, and it's a question that I had to answer myself many years ago when I was called to the city of Colombo, Sri Lanka. That is, you cannot draw a geographical circle or a circle of convenience around where you will serve God. Otherwise, you're not serving Him at all. Wow. You cannot tell Him where you will go. Jonah went to Nineveh. Jonah responded to the call of God. Jonah was a success, but it wasn't because of Jonah. It was because of God. And here's the deal. When God calls you, He doesn't call you because you just received a degree in missiology or because you're so good looking or so talented. God calls you because He wants to use you. I'm going to wind up with a story that has very much inspired me. A woman, and I told this story if you were in chapel this morning, I told it there, but I'm going to tell it again. A woman in the city of Philadelphia, filled with passion because of health concerns for her own people in that city. Philadelphia had been identified as the fattest city in America. That's not really something that we strive to achieve. And so with her passion, she began doing things, eventually caught the attention of those who were in power in that city. And the mayor invited her to be the health czar of the city of Philadelphia. And Gwen Foster started to do her work. She had gimmicks and games and all kinds of things. Within about a year and a half, the city changed. It was now the 7th fattest city in the United States. The point isn't large or small. The point is this. God calls us to the cities. He loves the cities, that is, the people, the inhabitants in those cities. He has pain over those who are in difficulty, who are in trouble. Our world, 68% by 2050, 55% today live in cities. May God help us not to ignore the cities. We are called to the cities. Thank you.